Okay, let's take you now to Chris Doyle, who is the director of the Council for Arab-British Understanding and a commentator on Middle East affairs. Chris, thank you very much for joining us from London. First, we had the airstrikes this week where hundreds of people have died. Now Israel have taken back the Netzarim corridor. Is this Israel upping the pressure on Hamas, but still Hamas gives resistance back? So will Israel's tactics work?
It won't work in that strategically in the long game, I don't think that Israel can achieve its military objective of destroying Hamas. That is what Prime Minister Netanyahu has set the bar at. So it's utterly ridiculous. But what he has done is, I think, killed off this deal that was agreed to in January. He will attempt to pressure Hamas to essentially concede on pretty much everything. But I think what we will also see is a pivot to increase military operations in the West Bank, because that is going to be the epicenter of this conflict through 2025. That is what really matters to this Israeli coalition. So under the cover of increased bombing, increased aggression on Gaza, the continued blockade, the denial of food, water, medicine, electricity to a civilian population under Israel's occupation. Whilst we're focusing on that, Israel will pursue with great determination its desire to annex the West Bank, to force more Palestinian communities out of villages, out of rural areas, into cities. And in the full knowledge that the Trump administration will be backing it. And there will be some in the Israeli coalition, maybe even Netanyahu himself, who will actually think that, to an extent, they will actually be able to bring about part of Donald Trump's plan for Gaza that he announced on the 4th of February with Netanyahu, that would be the cleaning out of Gaza and the rebuilding of this Gaza Riviera. I think that all those options are on the table.
Chris, I just wanted to pick you up on that point because you mentioned the US there, and I wanted to ask you about the State Department today saying that the ceasefire is still on the table. So taking into consideration everything that you've said there, I mean, is that really realistic?
It looks really unlikely. I think that what Netanyahu is doing is, by taking the Netzarim corridor, by carrying out all these attacks, he is actually resuming those full-scale military operations in combination with that blockade. The only way this Israeli government will go back to any form of negotiations if it really is about a surrender for Hamas. That's my view, which would include the departure of the Hamas leadership from the Gaza Strip. Netanyahu made it very clear that he was not going to get to phase 2 of the plan agreed to in January, that he would resume military operations. That's always been his intention. And remember, he has just welcomed back into the cabinet Itamar Ben-Gvir, who left the cabinet in January because he did not want to see the ending of Israeli military operations, and he wanted to see a full blockade. So it would be a very curious situation that Netanyahu welcomes Ben-Gvir and his colleagues back into the cabinet and then changes tack a couple of days later, and Ben-Gvir, no doubt, would leave the cabinet. It's not going to happen. So I think for the time being, we are going to see very significant Israeli military aggression once more on the Gaza Strip.
And Chris, where does this end?
I think that's the really major question here. In the past, many in the diplomatic community would hope that the United States would get their president on the line to the Israelis and say, enough, this has to end. But can we really see a situation in which President Trump is going to do that? It seems very unlikely. Now, it's not totally impossible. Trump doesn't adhere to any traditional molds. He's perfectly capable of doing things outside of the box. After all, he's just authorized US officials, envoys, to talk to Hamas. That was never a consideration under Joe Biden or President Obama. But it doesn't really look as if Donald Trump the man who said that Israel could visit hell upon Gaza is likely to really take the sort of action to stop what is really, in most people's view now, a genocide that is going on in Gaza.
OK, Chris Doyle, Director of the Council for Arab-British Understanding and commentator on British Middle East affairs. We thank you for your time and for your analysis.